everybody, this is Eve Ewing. I'm the curator of the Black Freedom Lecture Series. And before we get started with our amazing talk this week, there are two things I want to remind you to do. The first thing is, if you are not already signed up for our newsletter, you definitely want to do that. It's how you're going to find out about all of our incredible speakers and enter a raffle to win books and find out about questions and readings and all the cool stuff. So go to our website, blackfreedomlectures.org/newsletter, and sign up if you haven't done that already. The second thing is, we would really love this to be a collective learning experience. So if you haven't done so already, we encourage you to get together with a squad, a group of friends, or just one friend. Hook up with somebody and say, hey, I'm watching this thing, I'm reading this stuff, and I would love to have some conversations with you about it. Get together so that this is not a thing we're doing alone. That's it. Welcome. Really geeked to have you, and let's get into it.
Hi everyone, my name is C. Riley Snorton. I'm a Black trans activist, a Black trans person, a Black trans studies scholar, and I'm also the interim faculty director for the Center for the Study of Race, Politics, and Culture, and a professor of English and Gender and Sexuality Studies at the University of Chicago. Thank you so much to my colleague, Dr. Eve Ewing, for the invitation, and for all the folks who have labored to make this possible. I'm looking forward to being in conversation with you on April 15th. For this short lecture, I've decided to read the preface of Black on Both Sides, A Racial History of Trans Identity. And so after doing that, I'll return and talk a little bit about some of the implications of the writing there in terms of thinking together the necessary simultaneity of Black liberation and trans liberation. But I'll also talk a little bit about the things, the events that have happened since I've been working on that book and since it was released in 2017. The state-sanctioned murder and police killing of Tony McDade, the beating of Ayanna Dora. Anyway, I'll see you all soon. Preface to Black on Both Sides, A Racial History of Trans Identity. Epigraph. The problem considered here is one of time. France Fanon, Black Skin, White Mass. In 2015, while garnering publicity for the feature film Grandma in a live interview with Robin Roberts on Good Morning America, actress, artist, and advocate Laverne Cox expressed a public grief. I'll quote, "We in the transgender community right now are reeling. Just yesterday we found out another trans woman was murdered, Tamara Dominguez, and that makes a total 17 known transgender women who've been murdered in 2015 alone. It really is a state of emergency. Your life should not be in danger simply for being who you are. We have to say these people's names. I think the reason why trans women experience so much violence has to do with employment, housing, healthcare, etc. So we need to make sure that trans lives matter." End quote. Tamara Dominguez died on Monday, August 17th, 2015, in a Missouri hospital after sustaining injuries from being run over repeatedly with a sports utility vehicle in a church parking lot in northeast Kansas City. According to her boyfriend, she had been living as a woman in the U.S. for at least 7 years, after leaving her native Mexico to escape discrimination for being transgender. She had a lot of dreams, the unidentified boyfriend told the Kansas City Star, invoking a familiar mythology of the hopes, dreams, and promises of different experiential modes of freedom possible in the United States. The framing of her death in such terms underscores the veiled promise of the nation-state, as it also calls attention to what Enoch Page and Matt Richardson describe as a state technique of racialized gender that produces gender-variant social formations as an excluded caste. According to an article published on advocate.com under the headline, quote, "Victim number 17, trans woman of color murdered in Missouri," information regarding Dominguez's death came on the heels of news about 3 African American trans women, Amber Monroe of Detroit, Michigan, Candace Capri of Phoenix, Arizona, and Alicia Walker of Smithfield, North Carolina, reported missing just in the past few days. The recurrent practice of enumerating the dead en masse in social media seemed to conform to the logics of accumulation that structure racial capitalism, in which the quantified abstraction of Black and trans deaths reveals the calculated value of Black and trans lives through state grammars of deficit and debt. As Catherine McKittrick explains about the long durée of slavery, this is where it begins. This is where historic Blackness comes from. The list, the breathless numbers, the absolutely economic, the mathematics of unliving. This mode of accounting, of expressing the arithmetic violence of Black and trans death, as it also refers to anti-Black, anti-queer, and anti-trans forms of slow and imminent death, finds additional elaboration in what Dagmawit Wubshet refers to as a poetics of compounding loss, which she defines as a leitmotif of inventory taking, a reconceptualization of relentless serial losses, not as cumulative, but as compounding, with the subject's loss, both object and subject, past and perspective, memory and immediate threat. From this vantage point, consider how Cox's designation of a state of emergency to refer to the killings of trans women, most of whom were Black and brown, sharpens the distinction between the state's rhetorical use of that phrase and the real state of emergency that surfaces as a matter of history. As Walter Benjamin writes in his 8th tenet in Theses on the Philosophy of History, the tradition of the oppressed teaches us that the state of emergency in which we live is not the exception, but the rule. Benjamin continues, we must attain a conception of history that is in keeping with this insight, that we shall clearly realize, we should clearly realize that it is our task to bring about a real state of emergency, and this will improve our position in the struggle against fascism. To put it differently, a real state of emergency occurs as a rupture in history to reveal, as Homi Bhabha has written in his foreword to Fanon's Black Skin, White Mass, that the state of emergency is also always a state of emergence, in which the event of struggle challenges the historicist idea of time as a progressive, ordered whole. As such, Cox's gesture toward the numerous structural factors and institutional practices of racialized gender that delimit Black and brown trans women's life chances expresses territories of violence, sites of vulnerability and precarity, and scenes of slow death, to which one might read into the etc., the prison systems, asylums, and detention centers. These institutions and their emplacement within current biopolitical and necropolitical orders bear upon the problem of history as a mode of organizing time according to anti-Black and anti-trans rule. They perpetuate racialized gender as the norm and as the necessary and naturalized consequence of the current order of things, the experience of which my colleague Kara Keeling describes as a spatio-temporal concern, as that intolerable yet quotidian violence that functions as the historical index of belonging to our time. Cox's comment, which emerges as an interruption in the flow of entertainment news to inhere within the disruptive temporality of mourning, is articulated within the persistent tense of the present as another indication of its break with teleological time. Her articulation of loss on behalf of the transgender community intimates an understanding of what Frantz Fanon wrote in relation to the colonial state of emergency that produces Black alienation, Black grief, was more than mere was more than mere individual concern. And into that political and epistemological gap, famously expressed that besides phylogeny and ontogeny stands sociogeny. As Keeling explains, Fanon's own interest is exploding the temporality of the colonial mode of representation of otherness, and in revealing a temporality that raises the possibility of impossibility within colonial rule, that being Black liberation. The sliding indexicality of Cox's we seems also to gesture towards the temporality of sociogenesis in the form of a plea, or better yet, a prayer, for a different future to begin now. The named we of the transgender community that opens Cox's expression feels different from the undesignated we in the concluding flourish, which invents an intersubjective community called forth by the urgency of trans life matters, in which one can hear as an echo from the future what another colleague, Kathy Cohen, carefully elaborates in a question about the radical potential of a queer politic based on analysis of power rather than a fraught sense of shared identity. This, too, is what Kai M. Green and Trevor Ellison describe as tranifesting, as a politic and epistemic operation that attempts to bring forth forms of collective life that can enliven and sustain us in a future worth living. It is in this sense that Cox's final rhetorical flourish, we need to make sure that trans lives matter, which indexes without citation the movement for Black lives, does not sound wholly appropriative and becomes an opportunity to hear that there is no absolute distinction between Black lives mattering and trans lives mattering within the rubric of racialized gender. I think a lot about Blake Brockington, a Black trans man who garnered national attention in 2014 as the first out trans homecoming king in North Carolina. He was nominated by his classmates at East Mecklenburg High School in Charlotte, but he also earned his title by raising money, $2,555.55 out of the total $3,203.22 collected for the school's selected charity, Mothering Across Continents, a Charlotte-based nonprofit that focuses on youth development in South Sudan, Haiti, South Africa, and Mexico. Before moving to Charlotte to live with his father, Brockington grew up in the coastal city of Charleston, South Carolina. I grew up in inland South Carolina, near the state capital, Columbia. By the time he made king, Brockington had already moved in with a foster family. Life with his father and stepmother became untenable after he came out as trans in the 10th grade. In an interview with the Charlotte Observer, he explained, "My family feels like this is a decision I made. They think, you're already Black. Why would you want to draw more attention to yourself? But it's not a decision, it's who I am. I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy." Suffice to say, I understand his family's reaction. The sensibilities expressed by Brockington's family, particularly in the use of already Black, underscore how Blackness and transness are tethered in the contemporary landscape in terms of visibility, in which the form of attention directed at Black and trans people is frequently articulated through policies such as House Bill 2, HB 2, which passed on the one-year anniversary of Brockington's death on March 23, 2016. Sometimes referred to as the Transgender Bathroom Bill, HB 2 prohibits city municipalities from defining LGBT people as a protected class, while simultaneously eliminating any state modes of redress for workplace discrimination based on the narrowly prescribed rubrics of difference, race, religion, color, national origin, age, handicap, or biological sex that it purportedly protects. Media focus on transgender people's abilities to use the bathroom of their choice obscures a more urgent conversation about what modes of dispossession are possible under the ruse of state inclusion. Brockington, however, described the attention he received after his homecoming win as the hardest part of his trans journey. Really hateful things were said on the internet. It was hard. I saw how narrow-minded the world really is. He elaborated in the short documentary Brockington, quote, I've had people call me a tranny, a dyke. I've had people call me he, she, it thing, you know? They called me homecoming thing and called me a pervert and an abomination. Different things. I've gotten a lot of different things, end quote. This list of different things echoes what Hortense Spillers has described as a meeting ground of investments and privations in the national treasury of rhetorical wealth, in which the preponderance of terminology is a testament to the need of the nation state and national culture to invent such a thing into being. This list also expresses the imbrications of anti-Black and anti-trans animus, as each entry materializes a history of racialized gender denigration. As Spillers writes, in reference to the particular figurations of the Black woman, quote, embedded in a bizarre axiological ground, they demonstrate a sort of telegraphic coding. They are markers so loaded with mythical prepossession that there is no easy way for the agents buried beneath them to come clean. In that regard, the names by which I am called in the public place render an example of signifying property plus. In order for me to speak a truer word concerning myself, I must strip down through layers of attenuated meaning, made in excess over time, assigned by a particular historical order, and there await whatever marvels of my own inventiveness. The personal pronouns are offered in the service of a collective function. End quote. For Brockington, that truer word seems to have been human, against its biocentric determinism or ethnocentric overrepresentation as man, and in all of the richness of meaning that Sylvia Wynter has imbued to the term as a form of praxis. In an interview, Brockington related, I'm still a person, and trans people are still people. Our bodies just don't match what's up in our heads. We need support, not people looking down at us or degrading us or overlooking us. We are still human. The frequency with which he availed himself of interviews and participated in Black Lives Matter rallies and events associated with Transgender Day of Remembrance is perhaps the evidence of an impetus to replace one collective function with another. In one of a number of photographs taken at a rally in late November of 2014, Brockington is positioned between two signs, which read, I have the right to be alive, and I'm not a criminal. The photograph occurs as an afterimage, what Kimberly Juanita Brown defines as an ocular residue, a visual duplication as well as an alteration, in a riff on Audre Lorde. Dressed in all black, Brockington wears a shirt that bears a list of names, conjoined by ampersands, and finished with an ellipses. Emmett and Amadou and Sean and Oscar and Trayvon and Jordan and Eric and Mike and Azel and ellipses. A few months later, his own name occupied the elliptical space. An article published on Advocate.com on March 24, 2015, the day after Brockington's death, notes that Brockington's death was the 6th reported suicide of a trans youth in the U.S. that year, in an epidemic that trans advocates say sees far more casualties than are noted by the media. In an online search for in an online search for Blake Brockington, one finds that his Wikipedia entry appears under the heading Death of Blake Brockington. Its first line narrates the international media coverage of his suicide. The international circulation of news of Brockington's death reiterates what Jen Hartwan and I have raised elsewhere as the need to think transgender both transnationally and intersectionally in the current globalization of hate crime activism, anti-discrimination advocacy, and other modes of organizing for state-based inclusion projects. There we asked, what are the seductions for a trans activism for which traumatized citizenship is more than merely an identitarian pitfall and is rather a key condition of its own emergence? And what would a trans politics in theory look like that refuses such murderous inclusion? To emphasize a dimension of our initial critique, I'd add a reformulation based on another thinker and artist whose work on the mathematics of Black life has framed much of my thinking here. On his track, Mathematics, from the 1999 album Black on Both Sides, Yazine Bey explains, numbers is hard and real, and they never have feelings, but you push too hard. Even number got limits. And in relation to matters of Black trans life, I read Bey's description as an invitation to consider the theories and politics that emerge at the limits of current operations for making biopolitical and necropolitical sense of Black and trans death. In the introduction to her award-winning memoir, Redefining Realness, My Path to Womanhood, Identity, Love, and So Much More, Janet Mock explains that some of the impetus to write her story came from living with survivors killed. I feel that too, deeply. And as it relates to Blake Brockington, it moves me to consider the conditions in which he would be understood according to his self-definition. Keeling is again helpful here, as she distinguishes the politics of looking after from the politics of looking for, in an analysis attuned to the temporalities of emergence, articulated as a question that I bring to the figures in this book, as when they might be, a question that suspends ontological assumptions, rather than where they were and are. From this view, the connections within Blackness and transness gesture to what Fanon described as the real leap of introducing invention into existence that constitutes being to the degree that it exceeds it. This book is principally concerned with the mechanics of invention, by which I mean that I'm seeking to understand the conditions of emergence of things and beings that may not yet exist, to imagine temporalities in which saying their names, Tamara and Amber and Candace and Alicia and Blake and, occur as ways to destroy the meanings those names have been accorded by state grammars. Against and pressing beyond the instrumental materiality of Black and trans death, Black on Both Sides is an attempt to find a vocabulary for Black and trans life. In this sense, it works to do more than provide a shadow history of Blackness and trans studies or transness and Black studies. For many, it will not be understood as history at all. But as with Fanon, the problem under review here is time. Perhaps you may have noticed that I became a little emotional when rereading the preface, as I was thinking about the breathless numbers and the unfinished ellipses in which so many other names have been entered since writing this piece in 2016. I turned in the book to the press right after 45 was elected, and I'm struck by how much of this feels so similar to this moment, perhaps amplified as the North Carolina bill HB 2, in which racist policy and anti-trans policy are co-written into law, seems to have become a kind of blueprint, as similar bills crop up across state legislatures. But certainly it's not all about the law. And of course, there's also Tony McDade, a black trans man who was killed by Tallahassee police on May 27th, 2020, and the ongoing reality of the many trans folks who are locked up in prisons and detention centers during a global health pandemic and within the ongoing epidemic of anti-black and anti-trans violence. Hearing the news about Tony's murder and of the beating of Ayanna Dorr, a black trans woman living in Minneapolis, Minnesota, who was beaten by a group of non-trans men days after George Floyd's death and killing. This past summer felt like a pivot point in some of my political thinking, and is prompting some new questions about the imbrications of black and trans liberation. Namely, I've been thinking about who we will show up as in the more just worlds that we work to create with each other. And it's been making me think in different ways about the relationship between blackness, transness, and abolition, and that we might also think about these concepts as interrelated practices. In this way, we might turn again to the work of Sylvia Wynter, who encourages us to move toward the human as a praxis, that it's not a noun, but an active cultivation of being. And to that point, perhaps there's something that we can gain by giving up a willingness to be included in the project of gender and racialized gender at all. And that we might turn to something like non-binarity, not necessarily as identification, but as a political and philosophical orientation, which means taking on the uncertain and the unclassified as modes of experiencing ourselves and our relations to others. This idea in particular is born from a question about how can we approach a deep sense of entanglement. And I use entanglement here in relation to, but not quite the same thing as solidarity. But it also buoys back out onto the need to sit with the larger spectrum for thinking about anti-black and anti-trans harm. Namely, that black and trans people cannot be understood politically, narrowly, through the disturbing and spectacular ways that we have been rendered prematurely dead. And so I sit again with an insistence on more livable black and trans lives. I really appreciate the opportunity to offer up some recorded thoughts before our conversation, and I hope you'll hear this as an invitation to think together, to raise some questions, to think about what's necessary alongside what's possible. When my colleague invited me into the Black Freedom series, I really wanted to take that on as a collective process where, I think the kind of project of thinking means necessarily that we ask more questions, that we ask questions hopefully towards making them better questions, and that we, veer away from any kind of immediate or ready answer. So I look forward to the questions that we'll have with and for each other. See you soon.